Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to sit down and talk about some books I've read in the last, month. It's early April, so these will actually be books that I read in the month of March. I think I'm going to film this clip now and then I'll come back with my thoughts about some of the other books because I kind of wrote down a document of things I want to talk about in some of these books, and I'm not prepared right now to get into those ones, but I'll start with this book because I kind of feel like anything I want to say, I can kind of just say, like I can kind of riff on this book right now. It's still very fresh in my mind. So I'm going to start with West of Eden by Jean Stein. This is one of my favorite books I've read in a while. It is nonfiction, and most of these books will be, actually I think all these books will be nonfiction. I also think I might talk about a few movies as well, but right now we'll just focus on this. So this is a kind of biographic telling of a few different families in Hollywood, big dynastic families. And so we learn about, let's see, Edward Doheny, which if you're from LA or have been to LA, you know about Doheny Drive. There is Jack Warner, who was one of the founding brothers of the Warner Brothers. And then, let's see, Jane Garland, the troubled daughter of an aspiring actress who never could escape her mother's schemes. Jennifer Jones, an actress from Oklahoma who won the Academy Award at 25, but struggled with despair amid her fame and glamour. And then the last story is about Jean Stein's family, or actually her father, Jules. I really loved this book. If you love Hollywood, just kind of like the history of Hollywood, I really recommend this book. I also love that the cover is an Ed Ruscha painting. But yeah, my favorite story in this one was about Jane Garland. So she was this young girl who was very troubled. She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but honestly, that diagnosis was pretty like wishy-washy. Does that make sense? The diagnosis does not seem like in modern days it would have been the same. But she was very troubled, and there's kind of different stories about why she might have been the way she was. But regardless, the story is about these artists, these like young artists from UCLA, these 2 or 3 men who ended up being like very successful artists. But they were her caretakers. So they would take her around and kind of make her feel like normal. Like they were kind of her chaperones in a way. So they would take her to these art parties. They would take her bowling. They would, just kind of try to give her a normal life. She was not in institutions. I don't think she might have been in one institution for a short period, but they really didn't want her to be in an institution. So yeah, these artists were employed by her mother, and they kind of just took her around and did all this stuff with her. One of the guys kind of had a crush on her, and then the other one was like not into her. And then the one that did have a crush on her, she didn't like, and she thought that he was like crazier than she was. It's a really interesting story. But yeah, I definitely recommend this book. I was really, like I said, really reading a lot of nonfiction in the month of March, and I think that's it. That's all I'm going to say for this book. So we'll move on to the next one. All right, I'm back for the second portion of this video. This was actually the first book I read that kind of prompted this video. I read The Will to Change, Men, Masculinity, and Love by Bell Hooks. This is actually my first Bell Hooks book that I've read, I think. I feel like I've read things of hers in the past, but never a full book. So this book is about the patriarchy, but it's kind of focused around men and how men are also victims of patriarchy, and not necessarily like taking the blame off of men, but more just saying that like the structure of patriarchy is so dominating and large and over everyone that the reason that men uphold it, and women, is because if they don't, they're kind of casted aside and they don't have the same privileges that they would have if they opted into the patriarchy. So I have my laptop here. Hooks argues that men and women uphold patriarchy, that dismantling it would dismantle society as a whole, to which the consequences would be devastating. But she also argues that men on a whole are still unsatisfied with their status within the patriarchy, because to withhold it themselves, to be a man, they must also accept the downsides for men, the repression of healthy emotion and the ability to love. So kind of this withholding of love and this inability to express love and care for others is a symptom of the patriarchy. So I have some stuff. I don't want to get like into everything because it's kind of, this document is very messy and I probably should have organized it a little bit better. Men are rewarded with higher capital within the structure of patriarchy for suppressing their emotions and their need for love and affection and to be heard. Much of the mass media directed at young male consumers is created by self-hating, emotionally shut down adult men who have only the pornography of violence to share with younger men. To that end, they create images that make killing alluring and the sexual exploitation of females and the seductive reward. There's also like a little bit about how women uphold patriarchy, and it's so real. I think like as young girls, the first people in our lives that will kind of introduce us to patriarchy and like make us perform within this system are usually our mothers and the women in our lives. And I think that has more to do with the fact that women are like the primary teachers and caretakers of children, boy and girl children. As women have gained the right to be patriarchal men in drag, women are engaging in acts of violence similar to those of their male counterparts. This serves to remind us that the will to use violence is really not linked to biology, but to a set of expectations about the nature of power and a dominator culture. So yeah, essentially like this idea that we believe that if we don't have patriarchy, not everyone, but like there's this overall belief that if we don't uphold patriarchy, that our whole society will just completely shut down. And that if there's no dominating force, no one will be in line, and yeah, our societies will just collapse. She mentions the movie Sunshine State. This is a John Sayles movie that I actually watched for the first time a few months ago, and something I noticed, like I think the most poignant part of the movie, or the thing that I took away from it, was the relationship between this boy who was living with his, I think his grandmother or his like great aunt, and he doesn't have a father figure. And Angela Bassett is one of the main characters in the movie, and her and her husband come to this small Florida town, and the husband kind of takes on this role of like a father figure to this boy, and it's such a beautiful, sweet, loving relationship. And especially at the end, there's this scene of them together, and throughout the movie they're working on this coffin for this play that they're doing in the town. I don't know if it's at a school or at some sort of community center, but the kid gets in trouble for burning down this this like statue. I don't think it's a statue. I think it's like a parade float or something like that. He burns it down in the beginning of the movie, and he's in trouble, and his kind of punishment, or maybe not punishment, but his way to avoid any like charges or anything like that is to help out at this community center for this play. And so he's tasked with building this coffin, and the husband, Angela Bassett's husband, so I guess it's kind of like his uncle-in-law, he starts helping him with this, and it's just this really beautiful this bond that happens between this man who's able to show love to this boy who really needs it, and this father figure role for him. So she mentions that portrayal as a really positive portrayal of men expressing love to children, a fraternal love. So yeah, like I said, this was my first Bell Hooks book, and I thought it was really interesting, and I thought it was a very like nuanced take on patriarchy. And I mean, this is not like the first time I'm hearing that men are also victims of patriarchy. I think like sometimes on that topic people can get very defensive, and they might think that you're just taking men off the hook, and I don't think that that's what it is at all. I think it's just like this system is not really beneficiary. This system doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't benefit children who are at the violence of men, and it doesn't, or women, or other men, and it doesn't benefit obviously women or men. Oh my god, I don't know. Okay, I'm just like speaking these things out with you guys, just processing. We're just processing together. So yeah, I think that's all I'm gonna say on this. So we'll move on to the next book. So the next book I want to talk about, I'm currently still reading. I'm about 200 pages away from finishing. This is No Logo by Naomi Klein. And it's all about brands and corporations, and just the way that towards the beginning of the 20th century, we in America stopped focusing on product and started focusing on branding and how to make more money and corporate greed, and just kind of went away from the goods and focused on getting people to buy more things. So a lot of this was about at least the first half was really about just like the way that branding has really infiltrated like every aspect of culture, and how it went from being kind of like something to sell, and they wanted it to become culture itself. So they kind of pushed it into every avenue of like our culture. I'm gonna say culture again. But I wrote some stuff down because I can't really like eloquently speak about this, so I had to write things. There's also a lot of quotes that I wanted to share because I think they're really poignant. But I also just want to say, like, this book, I feel like I think it's almost like 30 years old. This was the 10th anniversary edition, but I think this came out in like 99 or 2000 or something like that. But it is still so relevant today, and it feels like things have only gotten worse since this was written. So one of the topics in this book that I felt like was still very relevant today is that there's a chapter about how these brands in the 90s started to try to get more diversity and to speak about causes or to like present themselves as on the side of the people, and how that was obviously very cynical. But now, you know, obviously in the early 2020s, that was a big push, you know, brands supporting LGBT causes and Pride. Remember, like, all these corporations during Pride, and just having, like, their commercials a lot more diverse. And then since the last Trump administrative started, that has kind of gone away, at least in certain aspects. And I feel like there's been a conversation in the last couple years about, you know, we were very negative about these corporations kind of infiltrating these causes, but now that they've kind of moved back into the shadows, people are like, okay, maybe we shouldn't have been so skeptical about it, because at least there was that support, you know? So I do think that's interesting. It's like, when we have it, we're very cynical, and then when we don't, we're also like, okay, we want it back. I don't know. I just think that's interesting. I don't have like an opinion on whether or not it's better for these companies to be outwardly supportive, whether they're actually supportive or not. I just think it's interesting. There's also a chapter in the beginning of this book that was really interesting. It kind of went into the beginning of logos and how, like, before these brands really became like household names, it was obviously about the product. And I mean, like, in the early 1900s, people would go to their shopkeeper and he would like take the product out of a barrel and package it for you. And so in the beginning of these brands, really, like, the beginning of these superstores and these stores that were moving away from like the personal shopkeeper, that's where we started seeing these characters, like what's the guy, the oatmeal guy? Hold on, did I have it somewhere? I don't know. Like Aunt Jemima, Quaker Oats, even I think like the McDonald's character, even though that's like way later and that's kind of different. But these kind of characters were in a way to tell people like, oh, there is someone behind this, because we moved away from the personal aspect of, you know, who is packaging your goods for you. You see him every week when you go get your oats or your meat or whatever products. And so they wanted you to have that familiar face that you feel like you could trust. So she talks a lot about the way that these corporations moved from the product to the brand and the identity. There's a few parts in here that I wrote down. Many brand name multinationals, as we have seen, are in the process of transcending the need to identify with their earthbound products. They dream instead about their brand's deep inner meanings, the way they capture the spirit of individuality, athleticism, wilderness, or community. In this context of strut over stuff, marketing departments charged with the managing of brand identities have begun to see their work as something that occurs not in conjunction with factory production, but in direct competition with it. Products are made in the factory, says Walter Landor, president of the Landor Branding Agency, but brands are made in the mind. The difference between products and brands is fundamental. A product is something that is made in a factory. A brand is something that is bought by a customer. And then there's, When the actual manufacturing process is so devalued, it stands to reason that the people doing the work of production are likely to be treated like detritus, the stuff left behind. The idea has a certain symmetry. Ever since mass production created the need for branding in the first place, its role has slowly been expanding in importance until, more than a century and a half after the Industrial Revolution, it occurred to these companies that maybe branding could replace production entirely. After establishing the soul of their corporations, the super brand companies have gone on to rid themselves of their cumbersome bodies, and there's nothing that seems more cumbersome, more loathsomely corporeal than the factories that produce their products. The reason for this shift is simple. Building a super brand is an extraordinarily cost project, needing constant managing, tending, and replenishing. Most of all, super brands need lots of space on which to stamp their logos. For a business to be cost effective, however, there is a finite amount of money it can spend on all its expenses: materials, manufacturing, overhead, and branding, before retail prices on its products shoot up too high. After the multi-million-dollar sponsorships have been signed and the cool hunters and market mavens have received their checks, there may not be all that money left over. Machines wear out, cars rust, people die, but what lives on are the brands. And this is connected to the move from manufacturers in America and the ones that are owned by the companies themselves. They have sold everything essentially, and then they now just kind of hire and contract that out to these countries and these areas that have obviously very lax labor laws, so that they can exploit labor instead of actually having to spend their money on their products and their goods, so that they can have more money for branding and obviously to pay themselves. So another thing that I thought was kind of interesting was this push from these jobs, these customer service jobs, and obviously they can, they can move their labor to other places, but what they can't avoid is the customer service jobs, the jobs at the actual locations that people are buying these things from. So what they've done is really push this narrative that these jobs are temporary jobs, they're for young people, they're, a stepping stone onto a greater life. But obviously we know that a lot of these jobs are not filled by just teenagers who don't need to make a living. They're normal adult people that have to work in these jobs because there's not much options. And they want you to tell yourself that it's something temporary, and that makes it, I guess, acceptable to work for such low wages. So you're stuck with this dichotomy of, I'm supposed to do better, but yet I can't because I can't find another job. So you tell yourself, I'm only here temporarily because I'm going to find something better. This internalized state of perpetual transience has been convenient for service sector employees who have been free to let wages stagnate and to provide little room for upward mobility. Since there is no urgent need to improve the conditions of jobs that everyone agrees are only temporary. Board clerk Jason Chappell says that the retail chains work hard to reinforce feelings of transience in their workers in order to protect this highly profitable formula. So much of the company propaganda is convincing you that you're not workers, that it's something else, that you're not working class. Everyone thinks they're middle class, even when they're making $13,000 a year. And then I wrote, Klein also relates this focus on youth to the producers of the goods, who predominantly are young women and teens in parts of the world with lax labor laws. She writes, though in many ways it is indecent to compare the relative privilege of retail workers at the mall with the abuse and exploitation suffered by zone workers, there is an undeniable pattern at work. In general, the corporations in question have ensured that they do not have to confront the possibility that adults with families are depending on the wages that they pay. Whether at the mall or in the zone, just as factory jobs and once supported families have been reconfigured in the third world as jobs for teenagers, so have the brand name clothing companies and restaurant chains given legitimacy to the idea that fast food and retail sector jobs are disposable and unfit for adults. She also, in the last chapter I read, talks about freelance work, and this was kind of like a new thing, I guess, when she was writing about this in the late 90s. This kind of push from these freelance workers that are like, actually, you can work from home, you can be your own boss, you know, you're tired of the man pushing you over and all these issues at work, and you can actually just be free of that. And she is kind of like, I think she wants to say that it's good, and she in fact was working freelance as a writer at the time, but she does also talk about the issues that like being your own boss in this kind of contract job position it is precarious, and the people that tend to promote it are the ones that are already very successful. So she is self-aware that like it's not all a perfect system, and I think now in like this gig economy that we live in, we know a lot more about like the issues with that and how much our labor is undervalued when we are private contractors in these companies, you know. So yeah, this is kind of as far as I am right now with this book, and I don't think I need to like come back to it. I thought it was just like an interesting addition to this because I am talking about nonfiction books. And so yeah, I think this is the end of the video. That was a lot, but I just like when I was reading this, I don't know, I grabbed onto a lot of stuff. But yeah, I hope you guys liked the video, and I kind of want to do more in-depth kind of discussions about books that I'm reading, so I don't know, maybe there'll be more of these. I think it's easier to talk about nonfiction books than it is fiction. I don't know, like I can only say so much about a novel, you know what I mean? But we'll see. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.